Good afternoon. This is very British, isn't it? If you're agreeable, the way I normally talk is I don't do PowerPoint and all that nonsense. I sort of kind of have a discourse. And if I'm lucky, at the end, it sort of makes sense. And if I'm unlucky, well, you wouldn't know whether it had made sense, would you? Because you wouldn't know that I intended to end up there. But I noticed that it says Tim Smit talking about sustainability. It's a tremendous regret to me that it says that, because I never talk about sustainability. I will, obviously, with deference to the lady in the front who's come because I was going to talk about sustainability, I will, of course, mention it in passing. But I thought I'd start by talking about the two worst speeches I've ever made, on the grounds that they illustrate quite a lot about my approach to things, because I will endeavour over the next short while to have a sort of autobiographical meandering through my life in order to understand how I came to the conclusions I have come to in terms of the way we run the Eden Project and what I think the future has to hold and what might be relevant from my experience to your experience and so on. The first really bad speech I made, I don't think any of you know what my career was like, but I studied archaeology. I went into the rock and roll industry, which I'll talk about later. I then went to Cornwall because I didn't like the rock and roll industry, and I discovered an estate that had gone derelict, and I fell in love with this estate, and that estate then became famous. It became known as the Lost Gardens of Helligan. And I learned a lot from doing that, and after that I did the Eden Project. But going backwards, when I was restoring the Lost Gardens of Helligan, we did a TV documentary which was very well received. It won all sorts of awards and everything, but there was just one mistake. Well, actually, there were several mistakes, but there was one mistake in the thing that they forgot to mention that we weren't open to the public, which was a real pain in the arse, because the day after it was broadcast, the good ladies of Dartmouth turned up in a charabanc, and I don't know whether you've ever met the ladies of Dartmouth, but they're a fearsome crew, so we had to let them in. And on the second day, 6 coaches turned up, and on the third day, there was just people just piling up queues outside. So my builder, Tiggy, he said, look, why don't we rip the toilet out the portaloo and take the door off, and then at least we've got a ticket office and we can charge people to come in. So we started to charge people to come in, and then they'd come in and they'd see us working, and they'd say, "What? That's fantastic, what are you doing?" I'd explain, and they'd say, "What's up there?" "No idea, mate, but here's a machete, why don't you go and find out?" So this is a great business model. People were paying to come in and then doing the work as well. So that was terrific. Anyway, in the middle of all this, I got a phone call to go and speak in public for the very first time. I'd only once before ever spoken in public, which was at a wedding. And it was the Historic Houses Association, don't you know? And it was at the RHS Halls up here in London. And it was an extraordinary event, because it must have been an auditorium about 2/3 of the size of this. And it was absolutely packed with guys in corduroy trousers and the tweed jackets with the leather patches. You know, they're probably all called Nigel or something. And they all owned stately homes, and they were coming because they had heard, A, that I'd been an archaeologist, and B, that I had just done this restoration of a garden. So they assumed I was like them. So they were coming expecting me to tell them a few bon mots about how to market their gardens and stately homes to the public. And I managed to alienate the entire audience in the first sentence. Because what I said was, I said, look, if you can't dream in it, if you don't feel like getting drunk in it, and you're not inspired to make love in it, for fuck's sake, tarmac it. And the audience just went, "Ah!" And it didn't get any better either. But I was actually trying to make a serious point, and where it's relevant to this conversation is this, that we have a belief that the past is somehow a better place. The past, of course, was filled with cottages, with thatched roofs, the smell of bread, butterflies, birds. It was always like that, wasn't it? It was perfect. Okay. I'll give you an illustration of how perverse our minds are. If a 1920s car were to go through that wall right now, bang, other than the regrettable loss of life just here, the rest of you probably could not help yourselves but say, what a beautiful old car. It's old, it must be beautiful. When's the last time you saw someone look at an old thing and say, it's a rather ugly old thing? You just don't do it. We associate those things together. I can help. I can take you to a friend who's got dental equipment from the 1600s. Suddenly you will find the future looks very bright. You see, I'm very excited about the future, and I think we're living at a very exciting time. But we need to actually kind of say, yeah, it is exciting, and not hide from it. And I hope during the course of my conversation you'll agree with me that it's an exciting time. The second really crap speech I made, which was actually in impact terms far worse than that one, was actually last November. I don't know how many of you have ever been to Telford, but in Telford they saw fit that as a part of regeneration they built a whacking great conference centre out of all proportion to the population of Telford. It's a huge thing. And I've been invited to go up to speak, and all of you are senior people here, so you know what it's like. I mean, if you're anything like me, when you're going to make a speech, you need just a couple of minutes, don't you, just to get in the zone, to just remind yourself of those few stories that if you go blank, you can just hold on to start and buy yourself time. You know that feeling? Well, anyway, I got there late because they got a fantastic one-way system in Telford, which, I don't know, some maniac, and I knocked on the door of the stage for the conference centre, and this guy in a silver lame jacket comes out, and he says, "Mate, am I pleased to see you?" I wish the feeling had been mutual. And he says, "I'll tell him you're here." You know, no coffee or, you know, tell me. He scuttles up these wooden stairs through a velvet curtain, and the next thing I hear is, "I'd like a big American hand for Mr. Tim Smit." And on the of Smit, this bloody loud disco music comes on, and the whole place is shaking, right? It's actually shaking. He then scuttles down the wooden stairs and he says, "You're on." So imagine, okay, you're me, okay? Just try and get in this zone, you are me. You've parted the curtains, not sure what's the other side at all, and what you see is 4,000 Americans standing up with those eyes like hamsters of eagerness. But the most extraordinary thing is they are all punching the air in time with what they think the disco beat is. Right, and they've also got these kind of Gestapo lights onto the stage. So I walk on, and I think, oh, fuck, I can't think what I'm going to say. So I go, it'll come. So I thought, walk very coolly, calmly, look as if you're in control, do that dominance thing. Anyway, I got to the point where you're supposed to turn, like here, in the middle, you know, to look and with authority. Still nothing, you know, because usually you can imagine the words going up your backbone, can't you, and coming over the top of your head and out your mouth. Well, some beaver had built a huge dam across the back here, and I thought, well, I'll get close to the orchestra pit. I got literally to the point where my toes are on the side of the orchestra pit, and still nothing. To buy myself those few extra seconds, I lean forward until I know I'm almost at the point of no return into the pit. And I just look up, and in terror, I scream at the top of my voice, "You're all gonna die!" Whereupon, they all grab the backs of their chairs and start to sit down. I'm now thinking to myself, geez, how do I follow that? I think I've got to nuance it a bit. And then I hit on a great tip. For all of you who've ever got to do public speaking, this is the bestest tip. I went, "You." And "you." And you can do this pointing and saying "you" for as long as you like. "You." You know, I was building up to this "you" before, and then suddenly I thought what I was going to say. I said, "If you truly feared me, and you believe me when I tell you you are going to die on April the 23rd, 2023, how many of you would work for this damn company tomorrow?" Anyway, it got better after that. I suddenly remembered why I'd got there. The scale of the disaster, I mean, they were very kind at the end of the speech, a bit tentative, but nonetheless. I got back to Cornwall, and the following morning I turned on my emails, and there was an email written at 3:30 in the morning, and it was from the chief executive of the company I'd addressed the night before. And the guy said, "Tim, I've been up all night thinking about what you said, and I've resigned." But ever since I was a kid, I've been really scared of death. I don't know whether you've been scared of death. I've always been worried about those galloping hooves, and I've always wanted to do today what I could do tomorrow. But that has been complicated by a character flaw, which probably many of you statistically share with me, which is basically deep-seated laziness. So how do you combine deep-seated laziness with an ambition to do an awful lot of stuff? And I hit on a cracking idea by accident, which is the first management tip of the day. That it all began when I fell hopelessly in love with a Zimbabwean concert pianist, a blonde Zimbabwean concert pianist, which sounds unlikely, but I fell hopelessly in love with her, and she found me very, very dull when I was 19 years old. Well, she might have found me dull now, but then she found me very dull. And in a moment of complete madness, I told her to make me appear more interesting that I was a diving instructor, which would have been okay had I even been a good swimmer, but I wasn't. And having said it, I knew that I was in trouble. And that was to shape the rest of my life. That moment shaped the rest of my life, because I knew I had two choices. Yeah? I either admitted I had lied, or I didn't ever turn up again, or in a very short period of time, I would become a diving instructor. It was October 1972, and I decided on the latter course of action, and I decanted myself down to the West Country, to Plymouth, to Fort Bovisand diving establishment, and arrived to find there were 6 other people on this course, and they were all in the Special Boat Squadron, which is the SAS with webbed feet, you know. And there was me, a podgy middle-class chap, you know. And what ensued was 4 weeks of the most horrendously inhumane treatment, at the end of which I was a scuba diving instructor. And anyway, I went back, and anyway, the girl didn't find me any more attractive after that. But it did set me on a course of action, which was that I realized that if you are fundamentally lazy but also ambitious, there is one way to make things happen, and that is to put yourself in very public jeopardy. Go to a place where people you esteem are all gathered and tell them you are going to do something amazing, because the shame of not doing it will become the fuel that powers your engine to do it. Some people call it lying. I prefer to call it the telling of future truths, because of course, if you make them all come true, you're just doing things in reverse order. I also run my life by a number of other different philosophies. I believe in Tinkerbell theory, which holds that if you can get enough people to believe in something, it will almost certainly happen. And that is true. Every time I've managed to gather 4 people together who believe in something, it happens. I don't generally go around believing in men on the moon, but more realistic things. But it is extraordinary. I've talked more than 30 of my mates who I was at college with to leave jobs with big organizations and set up on their own. And not one of them has gone bust and regretted it. Because when you meet those 4 other people, what people who don't do it don't realize is there's a strange electricity that's created when you're working with people who believe the same thing as you do, which makes the likelihood of its success far greater than the anticipation of risk that you thought it had when you were looking from the outside. Because risk is a bizarre thing. I've never worked for anybody ever in my life. I just don't do it. I think I'm unemployable with other people. But I've realized that what other people are scared of in terms of risk is an anticipation of all the things that could go wrong. Whereas if somehow you could numb them to those fears and they just said, I'm going to do this, that energy that they were putting into the fear could have gone into the action, and their body language would be different and they'd have been successful. Does that make sense? It's totally true. It's totally true. And so anyway, I believe in Tinkerbell theory. I believe in last man standing, which holds that if you have a certain amount of charm and people know that you're not going to go away, they will eventually pay you large sums of money to do so. That's a really good career tip. And lastly, something that I do that you may find a bit more difficult to copy is I accept every 3rd invitation I receive, except where it clashes with a family commitment that I have to deal with. Why would I do that? Well, you'll have heard a lot of crap from people who talk about comfort zones, don't you? Comfort zones. Those words are just, they're the same territory as centers of excellence and out of the box and joined up thinking and leading edge and cutting edge and then bleeding edge, which is when I assume you get too close to the cutting edge. And then that absolutely wonderful moronic statement, let's try and think the unthinkable. Yeah. Well, jargon often gets in the way of stuff. And when people talk about comfort zones, what I talk about are blinkers. Even those of us who think we're radical thinkers develop your own conservatism to do with being radical. Therefore, if you're being radical and you want to put up a sign that is a really radical sign, but actually an ordinary sign which says way out would have been better, you're being a twit. You've got to actually distinguish your lateral thought from your desire to get attention. And I hit on the idea that if I accepted every 3rd invitation, but as a mantra, I was just going to do it, I was going to put myself in social jeopardy. I was going to end up in places where I didn't ought to be. See, most people will accept the invitation from their mates to do this, that, and the other, won't they? Or their social grouping, or their professional body, or all the rest of it. And also those, those white cards with silver embossed writing, which, call you a gentleman and all that stuff, carriages at 11. Everybody accepts those sort of invitations. Have you also noticed how every one of those invitations you've accepted has been disappointing? Why is it? A white card with silver, the event can't live up to your hopes for it before you get there, can it? But would any of you have opened a wing of a battered old people's home? I've judged dog shows. I've had the ignominy of addressing a group of people at the West of England, well, it wasn't meant to be the West of England Ballroom Dancing Championships. It was actually meant to be an orchid society, but it was a double booking. And I've been everywhere. I've talked to all sorts of people that I wasn't meant to meet. But at each one of those weird things, you meet somebody else who's doing the same thing. And you start to build up this strange fellowship of people who weren't meant to meet, but have, who bring something magical. As civil servants, you must be aware of the way that Hefke operates, really intelligent insights. If we want to build an incubation center for business and innovation, where should we build it? Where are there lots of clever people? Near a university. Let's build one. Well, that's not very innovative, is it? Has it ever occurred to you what an oxymoron it is to build an innovation center next to people where they're supposed to be thinking and they're paid to think? Why? Magic is never created by people who were meant to meet each other meeting. Most of the great inventions, most of the great movies, most of the great books are all about meeting people you weren't meant to meet at a time you weren't meant to meet them. So how are you ever going to have magic if you just go to where you're supposed to go? I'll give you an example. Every single major professional event of my life, everyone bar none, has come from being in a place I wasn't meant to be. I'll take you to May 1997. My PA threatened resignation when I said I was going to go to Hestercombe in Somerset to talk to a little charity that was set up. Actually, it was about gardens. It wasn't that unusual, but there was only going to be 50 people and a dog, and it was 150 miles away, and I was supposed to be in London at 7 o'clock the following morning. I said, it's the third invitation. I've got to go. I got there. Reassuringly, there were 50 people and a dog. I talked. I left. 3 months later, I'm in Plymouth for a meeting of the European Commission to decide where the money for European Budget 5B, ERDF, Regional Development Fund. This was a fund which was supposed to be split between all of the counties of the southwest, and they hated each other. It was hammer and tongs. Eden wasn't going to get a penny. The dream was about to die. And suddenly this old greybeard gets up and he says, my name's Humphrey Temperley. He says, I am the chairman of Somerset County Council. And 3 months ago, I happened to go to a speech by Mr. Smit in a place called Hestercombe. And I believe that he has the wider southwest in his interest, or else he would never have been in Hestercombe, which means that we in Somerset, our team, have decided to throw away 2 of our projects to enable the Eden project to go ahead. That one speech was worth £12.7 million. And it happens time after time after time. Put yourself in jeopardy. Don't let people talk to you about comfort zones. Get out of your own comfort. The reason it's a comfort zone is because it's nice. So put yourself at risk. I have a couple of other things that I do. I try to kill negative people. I once said that at a human resources conference. That wasn't the most successful thing I ever said. But seriously, I have seen how one negative person is like a cancer and can ruin an entire organization. And I always say to people, I was talking to a healthcare trust once about this, and they said, you don't understand, you're in the private sector. I said, I'm not, we're a trust. She said, but you can't fire, it costs a fortune to fire people. And I said, whatever it costs to fire a negative person, I promise you within 12 months, the productivity of wherever you are will have made it worth it. I said, but also fire them and make as much blood on the carpet as you can. I hate negative people, don't you? You know why I hate them? Because they're mean-spirited bastards. And what they really want to do, what's really going on, is that they can't bear the fact that you might have a dream. They want to crush it like a bug under their heel because it makes them feel so bad that you might have a dream. They're dream killers. I kill negative people at Eden. They go. Because if you don't, you are destined to always have an organization that has a cancer at its heart. And that needs to be blended with the tip number 2 of management, which is to work at losing your fear of being disliked. It is the most debilitating thing in any organization if you are in charge of things and you are scared of what people will think of you. You have to work really hard. It doesn't mean you've got to be nasty. You just got to know that you're doing the right thing. Anyway, I haven't talked about sustainability yet. You will have noticed that. There's a reason for that, because I really wanted to go back about the lessons of my life, which will all lead to sustainability. You see, the truth is, I could sit here telling you about changing light bulbs, insulating houses, driving less, flying less. I could talk about social engineering. I could talk about all of that stuff. But wouldn't that be insulting? Shouldn't you already know all that stuff? You do know all that stuff. I could talk to you about the specifications we've done with building at Eden. I could tell you all about that and what we've done to actually minimize the impact of on the project, and how we've made a zero waste building, and how we manage all our waste in a way that makes us revolutionary. We cut 80% of our waste streams out. I'm a complete fascist with local sourcing, for example. I could have told you about that. We have 2,400 suppliers, and we say to them, we will give you 3-year contracts rather than just short-term contracts. Why do we do that? Because we believe in regeneration. We believe in real regeneration, which means that you should be almost fascist about local sourcing. And it also means that you have the right, if you're putting money on the line, to say within 18 months, you will also go waste neutral, like us. And at the end of that 18 months, if you've gone waste neutral, we'll give you another contract if you've made the people that supply you go waste neutral. Anybody who understands anything about pyramid selling will show that that would have much more effect than any government edict. And it's a very potent thing. And the other reason why we give long-term contracts is, of course, that if you live in the sticks, a bank will never lend you money unless you've got some long-term contracts. So you can't grow, so you're caught small. And we give long-term contracts so that they can go to the bank and grow. And we then donate the Eden brand for them to sit under. And you will notice in many of the supermarkets around Britain, from Scotland to the southeast, you will notice many, there's Sharp's beers, the Eden ales and all those things, Doombar, you know, the Eden honey beer, which you see in some of the better quality pubs. You will see Colestic ice cream, the Eden brand of that. There's a whole lot of stuff like that we donate to others to come and supply us. Most people just talk about it. They just talk crap all the time about wouldn't it be good if, when actually you can do it. Cutting down our waste by 80% was so easy, and yet people turn it into kind of hippie shit. Oh man, we've got, you know. It is extraordinary, and you guys in the civil service could behave like Attila the Hun. Wouldn't that be delightful? We're just not buying anything from you lot, unless. And you could do it. You could be utterly ruthless if you were innovative and thinking outside the box. It's interesting, we were talking earlier about thinking outside boxes and stuff, and I was saying, wouldn't it be great if we could all take over DEFRA tomorrow? Anyone from DEFRA in? Ah, hello. If I was in charge of DEFRA, I'm sure if you guys were in charge of DEFRA and we'd had a bottle of wine, right? Wouldn't you want to gut the whole downstairs of the central office and have a bloody great caff full of all the produce that Britain provides? And when you want to grow stuff up the outside to show that we're good at growing, and we do grow in, and when you want to call it your Department of the Environment, you know, as opposed to like the Department of the Environment. Language is so authoritarian, isn't it? But why, when people talk about thinking outside boxes and all that stuff, why is it so fucking boring? Do you know what I mean? I mean, people, there's kind of a conspiracy of mediocrity, of tedium, that makes life not worth living. Wouldn't it be great to have all those buildings that we want to preserve so well because it's a historic site? Shouldn't you paint them red, really? You know you should. Sorry. Anyway, what else have I learned on the quest to sustainability? Yeah, I went into the music industry. I was at Durham, and I was doing archaeology and anthropology, and I was skint, so I formed a rock band. And when I formed the rock band, eventually we were earning more money from the rock band up in the northeast than we were out of archaeology. So my mate and I, we decided we'd go to London because we were quite obviously God's gift to music. We arrived in London to find there was 100,000 other people who thought they were God's gift to music, and there was about 99,000 more talented than us. So we ended up on the dole. And one of the things I learned about the dole was that it's not very nice. £26 ATP it was in my day on the dole. And I had a young family on the way. And what you do is you go out and you play football on Clapham Common. And then at the end of the football on the Sunday, you go into the Windmill pub, any of you know it? But you have to go around the back and out through the gents, because the trouble if you're a bloke is that kind of boys thing. If someone were to get to the bar before you and bought a drink for you, you couldn't reciprocate. Therefore, you don't want to be unmanned, so you go out the back through the toilet and you go out, and so you don't socialise much. And when people invite you out to dinner, you don't go because the cost of the bottle of wine that you'd have to take with you could have actually fed you for 2 nights, so you don't do it. So imagine you've done that for 6 months, but you've written a couple of songs, and someone's covered one and it's done quite well. On the Friday, you get that green chair. How many people here have been on the dole before? Yeah. Oh, great, I'm amongst friends here. If you haven't been, it's tough, man. You've missed a really great experience and formative. It's like my son once said to me, he said, Dad, why didn't you abuse me? I'll never be a credible rock musician now. You know? Anyway, £26 ATP, right? On the Friday. Imagine what it feels like when on the Monday you get a check for £275,000. Can you imagine what that feels like? I bet you're imagining what it feels like, and you have no idea how wrong you are. Well, yeah, it feels good, okay, don't make that. And I'd love to tell you how cool I was when I got it, and how proper, and I'm an environmentalist, of course, and how, you know what I did? This is an awful admission, but anybody who knows Wandsworth, there's a Porsche showroom in Wandsworth. And I beetled down to the Porsche showroom, and I went for a trial drive. Oh, this is good. And I parked up next to another Porsche. I thought, ooh, which colour? Fuck it, I'll have both. And then I realised what a complete prat I was. And I didn't buy any. But I'd realised in that one moment something which has lived with me forever, which is how material possessions become a substitute for your low self-esteem. And that actually when you realise the joke inherent in all that, it suddenly cures you of the desire to own all sorts of stuff. And from then to now, I've hardly wanted to own stuff. And I'm so grateful for that. I haven't become obsessed. I buy books. I mean, we all buy books, but that's about it. So what else did I learn from the music industry? The other thing I learned from the music industry, which is really important to learn, is I'd written a lot of songs and they were doing quite well. But I was writing songs for other people, and I had now had a big pile of songs that other people hadn't covered yet, so I had some time. And I wrote some songs just for me, because I love music. I've played since I was 2. You know what? I sold every single song that I wrote for myself. Think about that. Why would that be? You know I was telling you about risk earlier? When you follow your heart, it's the weirdest thing. Your body language is different. It's like when you've done the very best you can do, even if you fall short, but if you've done the very best you can do, you sleep well because you say, I couldn't do any better than that. I've just done the best I could. And writing these songs for myself, regardless of their quality, the body language you employ when you give it to somebody is just different. You say, cop a load of this, I love it. It's such a different proposition to, this might suit you, this could be quite good, isn't it? It's a different proposition. And I learned from that about marketing that if you're not a freak, and I'm sure none of us in this room are freaks, if you're not a freak and you love something, there will be millions upon millions upon millions upon millions of other people who feel exactly the same way you do. Therefore, the issue is marketing. It's how do you tell them about what you're doing or what you're selling or what service you're providing or what, you know. It's a very, very interesting thing. So intuition, trusting your intuition is absolutely crucial. That goes back to negative people, you see. The reason I hate negative people so much is I have seen so many people I love have the stuffing knocked out of them because they had an instinct to do something and other people told them, you can't do that, you can't do that. And it's a form of death. You're killing someone when you do that. Because actually most times I know when you do persuade someone to do what's in their heart, they soar away. You know, they do. The last thing I learned in the music industry, which is also to do with sustainability, is that in 1981, I had a very, very big hit record in France. And I was in this limousine going from the Plaza Athénée, one of the finest hotels in France, if not the world. I was in the Princess Suite of it, going to the Tour d'Argent. And there we were. My record was at #1, and the record at #2, which was going to knock it off the #1 spot, I'd written it. Miserable. So I'm sitting in the back of this limousine, and I burst into tears. And I was inconsolable. And I decided that night I was going to give up the music industry. Why would that be? Well, Dorothy Parker, the American writer, once famously said, the trouble with getting there is that when you get there, there's no there. Which I think we all recognize as a sort of funny thing. And when you aspired so much to something that you thought would put champagne in your veins and make you feel brilliant, it was just going to be terrific, and you get it, and nothing changed. Nothing. There was no, where's the champagne? Where's it gone? And you suddenly realize you're surrounded by a bunch of people you don't like, your friends aren't there, your family's not there, you are a product. And I just fell out of love with the whole thing and decided to go, and I moved to Cornwall. And in Cornwall, what was weird was I got to Cornwall and I was going to build a recording studio to record music for film, because I just wanted to just do music without artists and all that sort of stuff. Anyway, a misfortune, someone gave me a pig, as you do, and I loved this pig. And me and the pig got on really, really well. And he was lonely. And so I found him a mate, and they bred, as pigs do. And then, well, he died, actually. He was called Horace, and Doris was his wife. And Horace died of a terrible problem. He got, I don't know if any of you have ever had a Vietnamese potbelly pig, but Horace, we had this sort of farm place, and Horace went outside and got caught in the outside toilet. He got his shoulders stuck between the toilet bowl and the wall. And at first we thought it was funny. He was just going, he was there. And then I phoned up someone who knew a lot about pigs, and they said, well, actually, the only way to get a pig to go backwards of its own free will is to put a mirror in front of it. And I thought this was a joke, but I thought I'd try it. So I got a mirror, and I put it in front of Horace. You know, like a cork out of a champagne bottle. Because, I mean, imagine you see your face for the first time, and you look like that. You know, I mean, imagine all that time he thought he was James Dean. And it's like, yeah. And anyway, he retired to his sty. And he never recovered. He died. And when they did the autopsy, they discovered the poor sod had got a disease, right, which is curable, called erysipelas. But the only sign of it is black spots. I mean, how lucky or unlucky can you be to be a black pig with black spots? So that was the end of Horace. But we got more. And anyway, I decided I was going to build a rare breed park. And I went looking for some land. And when I went to find the land, the guy said, you can't have that land. But we got talking some more. And I said, I've been an archaeologist. And he said, well, I've just inherited this whole estate next door. If you're an archaeologist, you might be interested. I haven't been in there before. We're going in tomorrow morning. Do you want to come? So the following day, I went with him. And we cut our way in with machetes to this garden, which was called Heligan. 40 minutes later, I'd fallen completely and hopelessly in love with it. I didn't know anything about plants at all. But we cut our way into this walled garden, and there was this bloody great vinery where the glass was being held up in the ivy and the brambles, but the wood had long rotted away. And we gingerly cut our way through. And the sun came out. It was a January day in 1990, and these scissors, these vine scissors, were hanging in the plaster on the side. And I just fell hopelessly in love with the whole idea that this was a place that, like the Mary Celeste, that everybody said, tea time, they'd gone, expecting to come back, and that was it. And I decided I'd restore it. And sod's law is that, of course, if you decide to change your life like that, it's all going to go wrong. But I've got no hard luck stories at all. It was extraordinary. I phoned all the people who knew anything about horticulture in the whole of the county of Cornwall. I said, are you free tomorrow? And they all were. And then I hit on the world. I then took a lease out on the estate after they gave me all this advice. And they agreed to come and volunteer and work with me to do all this. And then I hit on the world's best fundraising line, which is utterly dynamite. I never had any refusals during that whole 5-year period. What you do is you phone up the finance director of a company, and you speak to them, and you say, I hear you're in financial difficulty, so I hardly dare ask. After that, yeah, fantastic. It's fantastic, that was. So we raised the money, and we restored Heligan, and Heligan went very, very well. And I noticed that the contribution that I was making to the Heligan story was that basically I'm not a scientist, and I wasn't a gardener, and I didn't realize how valuable it is to know nothing. And it's the same with just about everything, that when you know nothing, you don't come at it with the baggage of the past. You just come at it and say, impress me. So that when I ask someone, why do leaves curl? And then these horticulturists get angrier and angrier as they dumb it down and dumb it down and dumb it down. They get to the 5th iteration and they think you're taking the piss. And finally you get it, why leaves curl. And then you go out to dinner and you say to somebody before, do you know why leaves curl? And you tell them and they go, bloody hell, that's clever, isn't it? And they go and tell other people. And you then come back to the scientists and the horticulturists and you say, do you realize how excited people are about what you know? If only you could talk proper, you know? And that's the trouble with scientists. I mean, most scientists, let's be honest, are subclinically autistic, and they don't actually like people very much. And the idea of trying to make the great unwashed like us understand anything fills them with an ennui, which makes them want to go home and retire to bed. So actually finding a language that excites people. I mean, our culture is so weird, isn't it, in Britain? I mean, why are we not all interested in science? Why aren't we all interested in the arts? Because people were crap at telling us the stories. That's all it is. It's not that it's not interesting, is it? It's really interesting. Have you ever gone to the British Museum? Right? I seem to cause a lot of offence in my life. I was invited to be the cabaret at the Rockefellers do in New York a few years ago. And they took me to the Metropolitan Museum, and they took me to the Egyptian bit, which they'd spent $500 million on, you know, making all poshed up and stuff. And they said, asked me what I thought of it. And I don't know whether you've ever had these moments where They catch you unawares, and what happens is you answer honestly. I said, it's terrible. And they were appalled at my bad manners, and they said, why? And I said, well, to be quite honest, we've got Nefertiti, Akhenaten, Ramses 1, 2, 3, a bit of so and so, I said, but to be honest, all you learn from this whole exhibition that's cost you all this money is that the Egyptians were big on death. That's kind of it. Because it's academics trying to impress other academics. They don't sort of get under the skin of what the tale is. Look, I'm an archaeologist, and I go to the British Museum and I get cross. It's my subject, for heaven's sake. And I'm thinking, this is a bit dense, it's a bit thick, it's not exciting me about my ancestors or anything. It's not telling me any stories that make me feel the past is with us, Anyway, that's a point. I was very interested in communication because an awful lot of people mistake communication in the modern world with transmission. They do. The amount of money probably spent by government communicating, when in fact what they're trying to do is prove to their boss or someone else that they actually communicated. An act of communication allegedly occurred, so a box was ticked, compared to what actually happened. You have sort of like a dull bull looking at you. I've been communicated with. That's actually what happens. 9/10 of all communication is such crap, isn't it? The best I've ever seen is at the Agricultural College in Orkney. Amazing. They've got a brochure, I was given it, and I had to find the guy who wrote it. He said, this is the best brochure I have ever read by anybody. It says, we are part of the University of the Highlands and Islands, and we are the agricultural part of it. We are here to, 1, find out what grows on the Orkneys. 2, having found out what grows on the Orkneys, see whether we can encourage farmers to grow all of it. 3, having grown all this stuff, find out how we can keep the added value for having grown it in Orkney. End. Now that tells it like it is, doesn't it? You get where they're about, So we got into telling stories, and I'm fascinated by the telling of stories because, to me, the story of sustainability is a joke. We talked about earlier about light bulbs and insulating and zero waste manufacturing and things, and we do all that sort of stuff. But if the world was going to be saved by that, we can all go to the pub now. Have you thought, really thought about what we're going through? I did that recently. I got a good bottle of wine and I really tried to think. Not let somebody else think for me. I tried to think about what was happening. Go forward 200 years and look back at 2009 in your imagination, right? Imagine what your successors up there, if they were able to speak to you right now, would be screaming, I wish they had done that then. Just think about that for a moment. If we do have to make a carbon cut of 80% between now and 2050, let us, for the sake of this conversation, assume that that's the case. Has anybody thought what that means? You are aware, aren't you, that if every human being in Britain went to live in a cardboard box outside, we'd still have a 5-ton per person thing because the way the government is set up and our institutions are set up. So individuals can't do this. We are sold the story that we can all do it, but that's actually to get a mandate for the doing of it, isn't it? The implications of this, just think about this, is that every school child at school today, within their working life, is going to go through a cultural and technological change as big as going from before the Industrial Revolution and being parachuted into the white-hot heat of it. Because the changes are going to be radical. This isn't about just whether we have wind farms or whether we go nuclear or whatever. It's going to be also about the social changes that we're going to have to make. I heard a lot today, as I was walking through the show, the word community is, handed around, isn't it? Don't we use community a lot? Most people don't have a clue what the word community means. It's etymology. It comes from 2 words, by the way, communos, together, in gift. Which is lovely, isn't it? That's what community really means. It's not some bloody line on a map with some people in it, a demographic. It's actually about relationships and how they're being expressed. And when you talk to kids about community, it's really interesting how they feel very differently about some of the things, the baggage that we take with us to get to a particular point. To get them on board, you've just got to mention one thing. Go to any suburban street and see 400 lawns and ask yourself about the ridiculousness of the human condition that every house owns a lawnmower. Have you ever thought about how silly that is? It's fantastically silly. But our future is going to be about whether we can rediscover a new form of communalism, a new form of shared existence. I would venture to say that your B&Qs of this world, those type of companies, within 15 years will not be like that at all. I think they will become service companies providing things that are rented or community owned or neighborhood owned. And a new business model will evolve. People are very conservative about business as well. Eden is a social enterprise. I mean, a lot of people talk about social enterprise. The government often talks about social enterprise as if it was something to be talked of in a library hush for those dreadfully unfortunate people who can't get proper jobs to get some work. Don't you know? God, I want to spit when I hear that crap. Social enterprise is potentially the most radical transformation of commercial opportunity for 200 years. It's just being killed by people who think it should be for social work. It isn't. It's actually about new forms of ownership. That doesn't mean it can't be brilliantly run. It doesn't mean it can't be profitable. It doesn't even mean that the chief executive can't earn a decent salary. That kind of worthy, waggy-fingered sanctimony that goes with all that stuff is just awful. We might collectively, of course, as apolitical groups of people in the civil service, you can't possibly have an opinion. But you might think that a social enterprise might be something rather helpful with things like the water industry. You might. You might not. Please don't comment. You might wonder whether the state, the jump from the state can't do it to private companies ought to own it. There might have been a middle area there where somebody else could own it, but it isn't the state and it isn't quite private companies, but it's really well run and it's profitable, but the profits are for a purpose of some kind. You might think that railways, some of those old-fashioned things like railways might be good because they're so well run now, don't you know? Do you know how much it costs to come to London? I can get to New York, that price. Not that I want to go to New York, I wanted to come to London, which makes it even worse. But social enterprise, I mean, if any of you have had the privilege of looking or hearing Muhammad Yunus talk about the Grameen Bank, when you actually go and meet Muhammad and he talks about us, i.e. the West and our approach to business, he's gobsmacked at how primitive we are, that we've exported various ideas into the developing world, and we're too grand to re-examine whether there were some rather big pearls that we've now thrown away. Do you remember Tupperware? Do you remember the Avon lady? Do you remember Dorling Kindersley, books that were sold, you know? Well, the Grameen Bank set up Grameen Phone, and they thought, what happens if you get rid of those big penis buildings and get rid of the senior executive management, get all of those costs out of the toilet, and we will supply phones, and the bank will lend you the money to buy the phone, and we'll only make a 5% profit, and you can then rent that phone out. And when your mate has rented enough, if you can persuade him to buy one too, you'll get 1% of that phone, and he'll get paid 4%, and so on. Grameen Phone is now the biggest quoted company in Bangladesh, and they're about to go to lots of other countries. I wonder what would happen in a country like Britain if you could rewrite the narrative of possession and go faster stripes and sexual inadequacy and talk about, let's buy a phone. Let's imagine we had a sort of shaker mentality and we just want a phone. And you took on the big guys and you said, we'll make phones. And you know what? You can make calls on them. And they do all sorts of good stuff as well because we're high-tech. But you don't have any of that infrastructure. You go bottom up. Now that's supposed to be hippie shit, isn't it? It's supposed to be what people who smell a bit seedy and weave muesli talk about. And that is, of course, the Achilles heel, that we throw out those good ideas because we think they're a bit alternative. And you'll find a lot of chaps in the city will say, never work, all that stuff. Well, what the fuck do they know, okay? They're obviously very good at what they do, most of them, aren't they? You know. Do you know, I have a real big distinction. You'll be proud of me. 18 months ago, the Eden Project was asked to leave the Royal Bank of Scotland on the grounds that we were too risky. How cool is that? We're still here. Yeah. Yeah, where was I? Oh, yes, we were talking about business. So the reason you may think this is a ramble, but I'm actually trying to establish what we mean by sustainability. And I'm trying to talk about a mindset that isn't about changing light bulbs and having great waste management processes. That isn't about the techniques. You can find that out anywhere. But the real core problem we have as a culture, and it's a problem that you have as well, collectively, I mean both as institutions and as a wider culture, is that we don't have a narrative about what the sunny uplands might look like. How can we get everybody to buy into a vision of where we might go in the future if all it is about events? You've got to describe, I mean, well, as a culture, you know, really interesting question. When was the last time you think you were asked? Was it within your lifetime? Have you ever been asked why you think we educate ourselves? We leap to these giant cultural assumptions, but we haven't gone under the surface again to ask ourselves, if you were starting all over again, if you had to come up with a curriculum that made our people in the future able to be resilient and adaptive, do you think the current school system we've got, or further education system we've got, is the appropriate one? Is it? Do you see the madness of not asking those sort of questions? Because if you don't ask those sort of questions, the people who are currently doing it will hold on to what they're doing already because it's worked so far, but no one's actually asked why we did it. Was it to create widget people? Was it? Was it to create sad gits who think that the life is about putting a slate over your roof and living miserably, paying it off until you're able to retire, and then, of course, you're so happy you've paid it off, you have a heart attack and die? That's the fate of most people, isn't it? You know, retiring is more dangerous than being a jump jockey, you know that? Never retire. You see, anyway, I was very interested. When Eden, we opened Eden, I won't tell you the story about how we opened Eden, but we chose this place, and through a whole lot of stuff, we persuaded a whole lot of people to give us money. We built the project in a revolutionary way because we kept asking questions that other people weren't asking. So, for example, I was told when we said we were going to build this project, everybody said to me, Tim, you've done Heligan, well done, but that's a little project. This is £135 million. It's for big people. It will come in late, and it will be way over budget, and your reputation will be in tatters. And I went home, and my son said to me, he said, but Dad, you haven't got a reputation. Do you know how consoling that is? That was really consoling. So I then realized I could take risks. It didn't matter. So we said to the constructor and the design team, we got them in a room, and we got them absolutely rat-ass drunk. And we said, if I was talking to you, asking you how you would react if I said, would you build this project on time and on budget, what technique should I adopt to make you do all those things? 5 hours later, we had a solution. And no one, I believe, in the last 200 years has built a project like we have. We built it with the entire team taking joint and several risks for anything that fucked up. We live in a litigious society, ladies and gentlemen, because we don't trust our fellow human beings. Well, it might go wrong, you better pay for something. Ooh, ooh, ooh. Do you know how people react when you actually do trust them? I hate to tell you this. They react really rather well. If you hold out a hand, people will take it. You know what? We built Eden on time, on budget, without a single significant argument of any kind. You can't say that in many places. And we had such a ball that the team that worked on it throughout that period, when we had to develop phase 2, where we didn't have any money for the phase 2 bit, they all volunteered to work for nothing as we developed it, because they enjoyed it so much. And when we opened Eden, we didn't have celebrities. We had everybody who'd had anything to do with Eden was in one place, and it was beautiful, because it was real. It was from here. It wasn't about that. Those are really important things. So if you ask me why we built Eden, we built Eden because I wanted to find the most derelict place I could find and see whether we could create life in it. And we did. The biggest soil manufacturing project in history. I don't talk about it often, but we are the world's experts in making soil. And this technology is now used all over the world, mines across the world. 90,000 tons were spread and life was created. I then wanted to show how clever human beings are. We spend so much time trashing ourselves without celebrating. I hate that word celebrating, that's a bit like, without actually saying how fantastic we are. And the Eden Project buildings, if those of you who've been, how many people here have been? Oh, I knew I was amongst civilized people. It's an amazing piece of engineering, and it's totally fit for purpose. We only need to heat it for 2 months of the year. It's that efficient, and it's beautiful. And the last thing I wanted to do with Eden was to show that having built all this, we could run it as an organization that was making profits for a purpose. So we could run it like a social enterprise, but we didn't want to be a white elephant, because I know it's embarrassing, but I would actually really rather like to change the world. I really would. And I realized that a whole bunch of people who run major corporations are not going to be particularly impressed if they can dismiss you because you can't run a piss up in a brewery. And that's what usually happens to environmentalists. You get called muesli weavers, don't you? You get called a bit strange, a bit different, a bit alternative. I wanted to fight fire with fire and build something that was a global icon and be able to walk into any boardroom and say, I know how to run a business. I can do that thing. And you're wrong. And they would then be forced to listen to me. Now, that's vanity, I know, but by me, forgive me. The word me, I mean as a collective, us, not just me. So, this running of it, I've told you about the local sourcing, I've talked about the waste management and all the rest of that. This leaves us, the people. Suddenly, imagine me with 550 staff. And my chairman of trustees, who was Sir Ronnie Hampel, who was the great god of governance, he said to me, Tim, he said, you can't run a project like this like a gang leader. I said, what are you saying? He said, damn it, man, these people don't even have KPIs. And I said, what are they? And he explained, and I then really irritated him by saying that, well, surely if you were good at what you did, you'd employ people who also knew what they were good at, and you don't have to give them KPIs. And he said, Tim, if we don't sort this out, one of us will have to go. I said, Ronnie, I'd be very sad to lose you. And anyway, we were good friends by this time, and he said, have a go. So, for the weekend, I took 2 very fine bottles of wine home, and I wrote the management manual for the Eden Project. And then got ridiculous, because 3 months later, the board of Unilever had heard about what we were doing, and they wanted to have all their directors from all over the world come and have a change management long weekend. So we thought that was good, so we had them. And then we had BP, and then we had the BBC Board of Management, and then we had BT. And that wasn't so successful because I forgot about KPIs, and they'd done a whole human resources thing. And anyway, it was very sad, and the lady was very upset with me. But all the other ones were very, very good. And then Ronnie said to me, he said, damn it, man. He said, you're not supposed to become management gurus. You're an environment project. And I said, I thought you told me you were going to learn to manage. He said, yeah, but just manage your own people. So we did, and that's what we do. But we've got rather unusual approaches to things, which might be helpful to you. You see, one of the problems you all face is you live in institutions, organizations that were made by people some time ago, many of them, and they have a framework that everybody would like to smash, but no one knows how to, because you don't know where to begin. That's the trouble with cages. You need to see the bars exactly before you can cut through them. And maybe, I don't know whether it's helpful, but if I just tell you some of the things we do, which are a bit odd. Every one of the team has to do tricky days, which is that for 12 days of the year, everybody who isn't visitor-facing has to work visitor-facing in emergent, all the time. And that's because unless you know what life is like on the front line, you'll never respect people properly. And actually, and we do it on a lottery. So, on any particular day, you pick a straw and you just go into what it is you've got to go. So I've had to do ice creams, I've had to do waiting tables, I've done washing up, I've had to put my arm down a U-bend to take an old nappy out. I've done all that stuff, But it makes you really respect the people you work for. When you actually, you've got 5,000 people in a day and you've got to do all this stuff, it makes you respectful. We do a lot of other things as well. For appointments, all senior appointments at management level and above are made by the people who you will manage, i.e. the junior staff select their superiors. So the finance director was elected by all the finance team and the cashiers and so on. And it's amazing because it means that when you get the job, it feels bloody good when you arrive knowing that you were elected by the people you're going to be in charge of. And it's a very interesting process. I have not once have I had to override a decision made by my staff. Not once. Because actually, it's always a 2-day process. And it's always the same. At the end of the first day, the favored candidate is the softest and nicest. At the end of the second day, it is always the person who has those sort of skills, but they trust to look after their futures and Edens. And there's always a nuance that's slightly different. Fascinating to watch. So those are the 2 major things we do. I mean, you also have to be able to tell a story to get employed at Eden, because people who can't tell the story of their life are pointless, aren't they? It's pointless. I mean, what's the point of employing people who are so, like that they can't tell you who they are and why they exist? We help people with it. It's like all children should be taught that. But we also have this management thing. All the senior team, there's 90 people, have to sign for their contract, the thing called the monkey business, which is not a voluntary code of conduct. To do the monkey business has 9 rules. Rule number 1 is you've got to say good morning to 20 people before you start work. It doesn't have to be 20, but I mean, the principle is just being friendly. You find any organization where you have to spend the first half hour of the day having coffee and talking to people, it's amazing. People think they're communicating. Let people do it for themselves. You don't need to be a big boss. Just let people meander for the best half hour you can have. Rule number 2, you've got to read 2 books a year that everybody that knows you, both personally and professionally, would say were completely outside of your sphere of interest, and review them for your colleagues. Rules 3, 4, and 5, you've got to go see a movie, got to go and see a show, got to see a concert, same rules as number 2. Rule number 6, you've got to make a speech once a year to the people that you admire at Eden about why you still feel inspired to be there. If you can't make the speech, you've got to resign. Concentrates the mind, I find. Rule number 7 is you've got to prepare a meal for the 40 people that make it worth coming to work for you. We've reduced that a bit on health and safety grounds with some of my colleagues' cooking was a bit sporting. But also we had so many colleagues that we were going to be out every night, so we tend to do it collectively. Once a fortnight, whole groups of people gather around a place. And the reason for that is that every single major decision we've taken at Eden, whether it be Live 8, whether it be the Sexy Green Car Show, whatever, has always been taken at night, working by wine light. And the funny thing is, you see, in Britain, we all laugh about that, you see. Oh, we drink alcohol. Yes. Yes, and it's jolly good, too, you'll find. For those of you who don't drink it, it's jolly nice, and if you take it in the right amounts, it can actually inspire you occasionally, either too much, and you're inspiring only yourself and no one else. But the interesting thing about working by wine, you'll think I'm a complete hippie when I tell you this, do not work by artificial light, just by candlelight. Why? If you can't answer it, I'm not going to tell you. It's quite obvious to me why. However, the argument behind this is that every person who comes to work during the daytime is bringing day person, work person. Night and candles give you permission to bring complete person. Hierarchy is removed by candlelight. And also, you bring all your life experience to that table, as opposed to your work experience. Just think, looking around this room, if you were able to suck all the brains out of everybody in this room, everything you know, every book you've read, every relationship you've had, all of it, all that knowledge, that is really powerful stuff, isn't it? You could start a new civilization with just the people in this room. It may look a bit odd, but it'd be a new civilization. Yeah? But you've just got to liberate that in people. So that's the thing. But breaking bread is very symbolic. You may have seen that Eden is championing the big lunch. Have you come across the big lunch on July the 19th? Simply, that was our response. I'm so fed up with people like the Daily Mail that why is it that if I say how many people in this room have been mugged? 4, 5. I'm in London. I should be asking Cornwall, shouldn't I? So there's quite a lot. But still, the majority in here haven't, have you? Have the majority of people in this room had a good medical experience with the health service or whatever? Majority, yeah? Who hasn't? But you're still, regretfully, madam, you're a minority, and yet we would believe we're going to hell in a handcart, wouldn't we? Especially in London, you believe you'd already gone to hell in a handcart. And I wanted to hold an event that was actually enables a whole bunch of people to go out in the street and have lunch and put 2 fingers up at everybody who's a cynic and says that we're doomed. Scratch the surface, and most people I know are nice, aren't they? They are. Just take cynics into a dark room, blow their brains out, and then we'll all be fine. I'm a bit radical that way. Anyway, so that was the big lunch on July the 19th. Make sure you're having lunch on July the 19th. Anyway, the last 2 rules, I was just avoiding the last 2 rules before I got off the stage and whatever. But the last 2 rules are you have to conduct. I don't have the comfort of religion. But I believe that if you have good fortune and you don't share it with others, you'll lose it because you'll be shown that you're not fit to have it. And it will never return after that. Therefore, you must conduct an act of guerrilla goodwill once a year. And that act of guerrilla goodwill must be, you must do something unspeakably nice to someone who must never know that you've done it, and it must be someone that does not know you. Those are the rules. People thought this was a bit weird, but actually it's very cool. Just imagine what a country this would be. What a fine country that would be if we were all doing that all the time. And people who thought it was weird and hippie stuff to start with have really enjoyed doing it. The last thing that we do is that for all staff, all 500, is everybody has to play samba drums. I've spent a fortune on drums. I can't tell you how many drums I've got. But once every 18 months, we all get together with the surdus, you know, boom, 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 boom. We have 10 drum captains, and they take about 45, 50 people each. With the cabasas, timbales, cowbells, congas. No, hold on. Why samba? It doesn't have to be samba, but the point behind it is that most British people, would you agree that almost every child you've ever met between the age of 2 and 6 naturally, you know, likes to sing and dance? So what is it that happens to us then? Why do we become so anal and we don't do anything? So I'm really interested in that and how you get people to tell their story. So the final thing for me is to get people together. They spend half a day with these drum captains who teach them how to play the surdus and all the rest of it, and they all get together in a room about this big and they just go for it. And the first drum captain, the surdu guy, gets up and goes, huh! And you see the first 50 go boom, 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 boom. They're like rabbits in headlights. Absolutely. You can see the muscles like, because they're so scared of looking stupid. Then the cabasa people come in, and then timbales. By the time the timbala people are coming in, the surdu players are starting to feel a bit more funky. It's really the weirdest thing, because they suddenly realize a truth, which is actually it would take more effort to go out of time and fuck it up than to be in time. They're suddenly in a zone, you know, it's fine. And by the time you get to the 9th of the 10 rhythms, you could cut the electricity in that room with a knife. It is just almost a verge of hysteria. And when the cowbells come in at the end, to see 500 Brits just go crackers. They just go, the hair stands up on the back of your neck. Then after everybody's been hollering and wailing and everything, we get together and we have a chat about it. And we talk about why. Well, the why we do this is because I'm really keen that people should know how good it feels to do something that really does mean the sum of your parts adding up to more. Because when that happens, it provides you that 2 fabulous things, optimism and hope. And those are the very, very best fuels for a future to go on, I think. Thank you very much.